Hi again, this is Lex again with another episode of Azure On Air podcast. We are here live at Integrate. It's the first day of the conference. With me, I have Bill Chestnut. He came for a session of about half an hour and a podcast of around 20 minutes, all the way from Australia. But besides that, he's also, of course, also here to meet his good friends from the community. So welcome, Bill.
Thank you very much, and I'm glad to be here. I really enjoy coming in, taking part in Integrate, because I think it is one of the best integration conferences around, and again, catching up with all the old friends.
True.
I've been in the MVP community now for 20 years, so a lot of people, I think I'm the oldest one at the moment. Stephen Thomas is like the next one.
Yeah,
with it old.
He's not here, right? So
no, he's
count.
not. He's not here, so that doesn't count. So there's a few of the other ones that have been around a while, but no, it's good to be in the integration community.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, well, my BizTalk experience dates back to 2004 with a BizTalk 2004 beta training back then.
I was a little bit ahead of you. I did an actual BizTalk 2000 implementation in Australia.
Oh my God!
For a company, and we were just looking for it, but it was fairly rough and ready. The 2004 was much better, and I met a lot of the people that I know and now in the integration community. In that first, it was a training course they did in Redmond for 2004 to come back, and Microsoft had engaged us to go around and train everybody, all the partners up in BizTalk.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
But thank goodness we've moved on a bit from BizTalk now.
Yeah, you can imagine that. yeah. But indeed, even in those old days, when I started my journey, you were already in MVP.
Yeah, because it's one of the things that I've always done in the IT world when I've worked in there is to try to share as much of the knowledge, because there's no use. For simple things that you find a solution to, there's no use of anybody having to do the same. Share that information. And it's surprising even today how many people come up and comment on the SQL backup stuff that I built and put out there, and the running the BAM packages and things like that people always forgot to do. Yeah. It's things like that that's good. And I think I'm seeing that too, even from my talk today with the Logic Apps. People making comments on those things that we're doing. Yeah.
Well, that's indeed an easy bridge to the topic that we're going to talk about. You just delivered your session about Logic Apps Workspace.
Yep.
Maybe can you introduce our audience a little bit to that?
Yep. So it's interesting, when they first came out with Logic Apps, one of the big challenges was if you needed to do something in code, you didn't really have an easy way. You have to write a function, you had to deploy a function, you had to go and use that function. Where now the Logic Apps Workspace brings the best of both of those worlds together, so that you've got Logic Apps and functions in the same workspace. You can write those things that you need to write in C#. One of my classic ones is date formatting, because I live in Australia. We always have a different date format from everybody else. So that we're always constantly trying to format the dates and things like that. And then also lately I've been doing a project for a customer where we're doing a lot of cloud SaaS products. So we need to create a token. We need to save that token. We need to regenerate that token. And in Logic Apps, it would be a very large Logic app by itself, where in the Logic App Workspaces, it's a function. It's got maybe 50 lines of code. Mm-hmm. It just changes the whole perception of how you work with that. And it just makes it so much easier.
Yeah.
And the deployment side of it is that those functions just run as calls. So you don't have another thing to deploy. You don't have any of that kind of stuff to deploy. It just makes it so much easier. And they're getting better. There are a few things. Right now, it was just like the 4.7.2 .NET framework. Mm-hmm. But that was all to support migrating from BizTalk. Because if you think about the BizTalk maps and the BizTalk helpers that you would have had for the maps and things, that was all for the .NET framework. Where now everybody's doing .NET 8, so they're getting ready to come out with the .NET 8 version of that. But you're still going to have a choice between the 4.7.2 and the 8 because the different scenarios. You could have stuff that you are still moving from BizTalk.
Yeah. So if I can get it correct, Logic Apps Workspace, it is just one object, one resource, right? In Azure. So you create it, and it already creates a template for Logic Apps and for functions.
That's correct.
Yeah.
So basically, and then what happens is the build process is a little bit different. So normally for a standard Logic app, it's just zip up the artifacts and deploy them. Where with the Workspace, you need to build the function. It copies the DLLs into the Logic app folder, and then you zip up all of that and deploy it. So you actually don't deploy the functions themselves. You deploy the DLLs from the functions.
Yeah.
So
you can still use your bicep scripts, right?
Yes, I've got all of that stuff. I typically do a YAML build, and then a bicep to deploy
stuff.
The Logic app deploys just the normal function task in Azure DevOps, but I typically also have biceps to basically expose any of those HTTP endpoints in my Logic app into API management. Because that's one of the things that's missing a little bit from API management at the moment is they don't have a tool to consume the Logic Apps standard into API management the way they do for consumption.
Yeah, well, that must just be a matter of time, right, before they have it.
Yeah, I'm not really sure why. It's been a while since they've been talking about that, but at least we have a way to do it in bicep. And that's the thing is that I'm not as interested in what you do through the portal because I never want to have to do things through the portal. No. My first thing with all of my projects is to get it to where it automates the deployment for me, and then I don't have to worry about it. No. And then also it makes it so much easier for anybody that's making maintenance work. They make their changes, they test their changes locally, they deploy them into use Azure DevOps or GitHub to deploy them, and it works every time.
Yeah.
So, and that's just the big difference is that you get that repeatable process.
Exactly. Yeah, that's really key nowadays, right? Yeah. Such a workspace, if you have specific requirements for indeed a specific function, like indeed a get app token, that kind of building blocks, would that already be possible to inject it in a template? So once you create a Logic Apps Workspace, that you already have several building blocks you're interested in, which you intend to start using.
Yeah. So one of the good things is that the configuration and the logging are already there for you. So basically, what you do is when you deploy your Logic App standard, it looks just like a function app. So it's got the app configuration in there to where you've got all your values. And I use Azure app config a lot. Yeah. So what I do is I will have things I need to reference from like the get token. I'll reference the client ID, the client secret, and all of that. But what there'll be lines in the app config that point to Azure app config. So you do @Microsoft app config and give it a key and an environment, and it pulls it out of app config and brings it into the function inside of your Logic app.
Yeah.
And it just makes it so much easier to maintain that stuff, and it makes it easy to deploy to dev, test, UAT, and prod because you just change the environment in that setting. You don't have to change your code.
Yeah, you do it in the setting. Okay, yeah, but you can use the deployment slots, right? Or
you can use the deployment slots, but that's for a different problem. That's the problem of, okay, I've got a very active Logic app that's getting hit by API management a lot. I want to deploy to a staging slot, spin it up, get it hot, and then swap so that we don't have any kind of downtime between the deployments.
Correct. Yeah.
But it still uses kind of the same app config.
Yeah.
So that works all the way through. And it works, you can use it similarly inside of your Logic app. You use the parameters tied to app settings.
Mm-hmm.
But with the function, you just say, I want this configuration value, and it automatically looks in your app settings and brings that configuration value back for you.
Yeah, that's pretty convenient, right?
I'm hoping that we get a little bit more support in the .NET 8, because with normal functions now, you can say, I want to attach to app config, mm-hmm. and then you just say, I want this value. Mm-hmm. And it goes and pulls it out of app config, so you don't have to list it in the app settings. You just have a connection to app config, and you say, I want the dev value for client ID. But I'm hoping. I tried it with the 4.7.2, but the actual libraries that support that connection were 4.8. Mm-hmm. So it didn't work. So I'm hoping with the .NET 8 that we're able to get that connected up front, so that anytime we need to get access to those configuration values, we just use them.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Well, yeah, we have some Microsoft people around. They are not exactly in the .NET area, but still maybe.
Yeah, so I've mentioned it, and Wagner wasn't sure whether it was going to support that.
Oh, okay.
So, I'm just hopefully they're rolling it out. I thought I almost got caught this morning with them rolling it out and not being able to download it, but I got past that, and hopefully in the next week or so that'll be rolled out enough that we can test and start looking at some of that to see, because it also will give us an option, because right now you have to predefine all your parameters in your Logic app.
Yeah.
If I could use a function to call into app config, I can just give it a value that I want, call the function, goes to app config, brings me back my value.
Yeah.
And that just, it doesn't really change the functionality, but it just makes it easier to deploy, so you don't have to have a line in your app config for every single parameter you want to consume. It'll give you a more dynamic way of doing it.
Yeah, that's always preferable, of course.
Well, the thing is, because when you start, you always end up changing the way it's going to work once you get started. Yeah. So, and then you have to go back and add things to the config settings and things like that. Yeah. But one of the things I have done from today's talk is I've put up a GitHub library with all of my bicep modules that I use to deploy the Logic apps and to put them into API management. And so that's under a 6-pivot cloud integration GitHub repository. Mm-hmm. So it's got some samples all there, and it shows how to build my base environment and then in each application's environment inside of Azure. And the latest update to that's been to add all of the stuff to allow it to be inside of a VNet.
Okay.
And do all of the configuration for the VNet.
Yeah. So nicely looked down.
Yeah. So because I'm finding more and more companies don't want to use like the consumption Logic apps because they're out in the public internet. They're putting them inside it. It's funny, but it's not because they think they're unsecure. It's because they don't want to take the risk.
Yeah, it makes sense, right? Yeah.
Well, some of it does, some of it doesn't. But I mean, if the people you're talking to don't understand the way that some of this stuff works, they instantly want to put it just like they would anything on-prem, behind a firewall inside, so you can't get to it.
No, yeah. So. Oh, well, yeah. Well, still needs, yes, it's kind of understandable, right? I mean, so many attacks are happening, and well, if you just can prevent that such an attack might impact them anyway, well, why not do it?
But the interesting with the latest project is almost all of the data is already in the cloud.
Yeah, true, of course.
And we're bringing it from one cloud provider doing some modification to it and sending it to another cloud provider.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it gives their firewalls a good workout. So
Yeah. True. Yeah. So back to those Logic App workspaces. In what kind of situations, would you prefer to use them? Obviously, when you would need both functions and Logic Apps.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. Is one of the things that Wagner was talking about today is they're now going to have a C# script action inside of the Logic app. Yeah. So if you need to go off and do a one-time thing, it might be easier to do it with that piece of script. But again, I think if you're doing tokens, because one of the things I do with my get token is I go and check the storage account to see if that token exists. If it does, load it up, find out when it expires. If I don't need to go get another one, I just return the token. If I need to go get another one, I go get the token and then I save it back in the storage account so that the next call, because a couple of the packages we're working with have tokens that live for 12 hours. So we can cut down the amount of calls because I know remember in the BizTalk world with things like some of the tokens that we had to create there, you had to do it every single time because you didn't know which BizTalk server it was coming off of and things like that. So this gives you that ability to control that, and you use that inbuilt storage account that your Logic app already uses to basically store that token in there. And also the fact that when the functions bring it back, what I can bring back is I can bring back the token, the type of token it is, and the expiry of the token from the function. It's not just a single value. I can bring back an object and it gets exposed inside the Logic app to see, because typically you'll need the token and what type, whether it's a bearer token or whatever type of token it is, you'll need that. Instead of making assumptions, you can bring it back as part of that. So
that makes sense.
And a few of the other things is that sometimes it's just a matter of we need to store off. With the one example is we're pulling data out of Salesforce. We need to store the last time we called Salesforce. Because one of the things we found in their previous solution, it just used an every hour. So if for some reason the Logic app didn't run that hour, you missed an hour worth of change data. So now we use a function to store that last time it was updated, and then once it successfully runs, you update that time so that you always make sure you don't miss any data. And it's just things like that where you can do all that writing to storage and things like that in a Logic app, but then you end up with a very large Logic app
for a small task.
And where you end up with maybe 50 lines of code in a function that does all of that. And so it just makes it a whole lot easier to do that.
So also, just for efficiency purposes.
And it's one of the things, because also I work with a lot of developers that don't like the visual design stuff. One of the guys I really started into the .NET world back, I think it was one of the first user groups I ever attended back in 2001. It was the beta of
.NET V1.
Yep. And he said, if you can't write it in Notepad, it's not worth writing. So yeah, he would. Logic apps you could do the JSON if you wanted to, but you don't really want to. But the functions just give you that ability to fill in the gaps. And I really like also that workspace, because you can have multiple Logic apps that share that same set of functions. So it makes it a whole lot easier, because we've got one that retrieves the change data, but then we've got one that's exposed as an HTTP endpoint that retrieves a customer from there. So it uses the same token call, uses the same token, and basically reuses that code. So then it's just a get token action inside of your Logic app that you can reuse. You also have less overhead then, right? You can reuse the same token. And I have looked at trying to figure out, for certain things, whether we could actually use some NuGet packages to inject some functions into the workspace. Because if we build a Salesforce token NuGet package that we could just include in all of the different Logic App workspaces that want to use that. Haven't tried it yet, because mostly what we've done in the design we've done is all the interactions with Salesforce are in one Logic App workspace. All the interactions that we have with ServiceNow are in one Logic App workspace. And we've tried to isolate it that way so that when we make changes to that particular one. So
so nicely organized. Everything's separated.
Yep. And they all share back to a kind of our central service bus and app configuration and key vault and things like that. So makes a nice modular design. So, and I've converted a couple of people that were diehard function fans to Logic App Workspaces lately, so it's good. So
yeah, but it just makes so much sense to use them, right? Just like you said, that's really how the concept of Logic Apps Workspaces is. You already have a bundled set of Logic Apps and and functions, of course. So it also makes deployment just much easier.
Yep. And the whole concept, and I mean it's one of those things that there are so many connectors out there for the Logic App world. You need to take advantage of those.
Certainly.
Because as we all know, you may have learned in university to write a sort algorithm, but you've never ever written a sort algorithm for a commercial application.
No, let's not do it. Let's not do it. So we can do it in a smarter way.
So and that's the thing is that we decided to use the connectors for most of the applications. So, and then we don't have to worry about the token side of that. But sometimes we just have to do the tokens. Especially with the project we're working on, it's got some it's a new D365 F&O, that function and operations, and they've got a couple of different ways of integrating. Some of them are synchronous and some of them are async. So with the bigger integrations and stuff, you want to do that asynchronous pattern. And that the connectors really don't support that asynchronous pattern. So you need to create your token and things yourself. Like that.
So, nice.
But we've done pretty good on this project. We haven't run into anything so far that we just had to completely drop out of Logic Apps and go to functions. So we've got the architecture built so we could if we needed to. But so far, we've been able to do pretty much everything with the Logic App Workspaces that we wanted to. And there was, Wagner mentioned there's a few things they're going to fix around some of the connection.json, more parameterization for that and things like that. But again, it's evolving. It's one of those things when you come from a BizTalk background, you kind of assume things are going to be there because they did a really good job of building it when they build it. Where when you come to like the Logic Apps and the Logic App Workspaces, there's a few things that aren't quite finished.
No.
But again, it solves most of the things that we've needed to solve.
Yeah, this is the thing with Logic Apps anyway, right? And everything, that's happening in Azure. The pace of evolution is much higher, of course, compared to BizTalk.
Yep.
And of course, still a fan. But we can't compete with Azure, right? Azure is the future, which is fine.
Yep, and I mean there is an interesting mix at the moment. There's still a few of my customers that are using Logic App consumption, mostly for the small things. Where you don't want to have the runtime, but most everybody is kind of taking that idea that they need to do it with the Logic App standard in the workspaces so that they can do that custom code that they need to do.
That makes sense. I think we must be close to the end of the podcast. Do you have any final words, maybe, or maybe some best practices? Something else that you.
Well, I'll do a slight plug for one of ours. We do integration down under once a month.
Never heard of. Oh, is this? Yeah. Of course, you're doing a good job with it. That's
Yep.
Sure.
And so we've passed over 50 episodes now. We do a monthly episode. So, and it's targeted more towards the Australia, New Zealand market, but it's still general knowledge. I get a lot of the MVPs along to that. Yeah. And again, go out and give the Logic Apps Workspaces a try, because I think you will be impressed how well. And I think even for a lot of smaller companies, because you can do it in Visual Studio Code, you don't need Visual Studio subscriptions and things like that. Yeah. You can get started at a lot easier. And I find it doing training. I do a bit of cloud integration training, and it's all based on the Visual Studio Code. So it's much easier to set up training environments, and people can set their own environments up. So it makes it a big difference, because it's amazing. Over the last 6 months, I've probably opened Visual Studio maybe a dozen times. Yeah. Where I've got 2 instances of Visual Studio Code almost running on my desktop all the time.
Yeah.
So it makes a big difference.
Yeah, that was a good move anyway in the introduction of VS Code.
Yeah,
true. Yeah. I think indeed let's wrap up. Okay. Well, thanks for being with us, and our audience. We hope you liked this topic. If you want to see any other episodes of our podcast, you can just check our channels, and we hope to see you in the next one.